Welcome back to Athens Happens. I'm Ada McDougall, digital content producer for The New Political.
And I'm Taylor Schneider, digital content creator for The New Political.
Athens Happens is a podcast brought to you by The New Political, a student publication dedicated to explaining the nuances of Ohio University, Athens, and state politics.
You can find new episodes at thenewpolitical.com or on YouTube. Today, we are joined by our very own news writer, Lily Franks, a first-year majoring in history. Lily, do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Lily Franks. I'm from Oxford, Ohio, and I'm currently researching Ohio's House Bill 8, which was recently signed into law by Governor Mike DeWine. And it's one of a number of education bills, specifically focused on LGBTQ content in Ohio schools. And I'm trying to look into how school districts are preparing to comply with those laws, especially with when the language in those laws is vague or confusing for school employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today, too. Just walking through the language of some of those laws, how they're impacting Ohioans, Americans.
So throughout the entirety of 2024 alone, there have been a total of 533 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced in 40 states. Not all have become law, and many were defeated and didn't go any further within each state's legislature. Ohio's legislature proposed a total of 8 anti-LGBTQ bills, 2 of which were passed into law.
Which, bringing back to one of them being HB 8 that Lily was touching on, that was signed into law pretty recently. Wednesday, January 8th is when Governor Mike DeWine signed it, along with nearly 30 bills. Those weren't LGBTQ related, just HB 8, but specifically that legislation would require schools to notify parents if a child identifies as LGBTQ. That's if I guess the school finds out about it in any capacity, whether that's a guidance counselor, someone who works in the lunchroom, someone who works in the classroom. In any capacity, they do have to notify that student's parents. And this bill also allows parents to opt their children out of content that is touching on sexuality in any capacity, which is also vague and not completely defined. So the GOP denies it's homophobic, even though they're the ones that are spearheading this bill. They say that it's just a way for parents to stay informed, which is very interesting.
Yeah, so one of the major organizations that's been opposing this bill as it's been going through the various houses of the Ohio Legislature is the National Association of Social Workers. And one Ohio social worker who testified in opposition to the bill explained that lots of the provisions of this bill that touch on the things that school districts have to notify parents of are actually already required. For example, parents already have access to students' academic records and medical records. So the only real change in this parental rights bill, as Ohio Republicans are calling it, is the pronouns provision, where counselors, teachers, school employees are required to notify parents if their children choose to go by pronouns that, according to the bill, don't align with their biological sex.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That would, debunk the whole, we're just trying to make parents stay informed, considering that from what you're saying, parents are already informed about most things.
Yeah, so that list included in the bill sort of acts as a disguise for the Ohio GOP's real intentions, when really the only new thing that parents aren't already notified of is the pronouns and the gender identity part.
Which I guess kind of tags along with sneaking something into a bill that is kind of already happening anyway, is that Senate Bill 104, which that one was kind of just labeled as it regards the College Credit Plus program, but then goes into a bathroom ban for trans kids and pretty much anyone in any academic institution anyway. But yeah, it just kind of gets thrown into something, but it's something that it's not really going to essentially feel like it's going to be policed that heavily for Senate Bill 104, but House Bill 8 is kind of entirely different. So Senate Bill, or Ohio Senate Bill 104 is an anti-trans bathroom bill requiring individuals in primary and secondary schools, as well as institutions of higher education, to use restrooms and other facilities that align with their sex assigned at birth. Previously introduced as House Bill 183 in June, the House amended a completely unrelated bill, SB 104, to include the harmful anti-trans bathroom provisions. The Senate concurred with those changes by a vote of 24-7 during a floor vote in November.
What does that look like at the college level, like here at OU?
I don't think anything is going to change at OU. We're not having security guards stand at bathroom doors. Like, none of that's happening. Like,
yeah,
it's just people are just going to continue living their lives, but knowing that this exists sucks. But I can tell you at this institution, probably many, many others across the state, no one's going to be standing there telling you if you can or cannot walk into this restroom.
Right. What I'm worried about, though, is outside of Ohio University and maybe in some other schools that aren't as accepting to the LGBTQ community, maybe they're not going to have somebody standing there policing it, but there might be signs up or things that are just going to make trans folks not feel comfortable in that space.
Signs up, but then also having fellow students who might call another student out and go, up to some authority, which I can understand if another student doesn't feel comfortable with, like, certain things in a way, but I don't feel voicing it as hate is probably the best way to go about that.
Yeah. So one concern similar to 104 with House Bill 8, and I think any of these anti-LGBTQ legislation moving through the Ohio Legislature right now is just sort of the environment that it creates for LGBTQ students, regardless of whether any given institution decides to actually enforce those rules. It sends a message that LGBTQ students aren't welcome in Ohio schools.
Another thing to add is that this has been signed into law by DeWine, but it doesn't go into effect until February 25th of 2025.
Do either of you know if this is Ohio the one spearheading this legislation, or is specifically Senate Bill 104, is it being mirrored after another state who has already done this? Or did Ohio, we're one of the first, and it's going to be a domino effect, kind of like Florida's Don't Say Gay bill that HB 8 essentially copy-pasted?
I honestly don't think we're the first, but I also don't really know off the top of my head who we're mirroring, which sucks because I should know. But
you just know, as a swing state, previous swing state, I think people look to us, other legislatures look to us.
I was going to say other legislation has been put forth in this in other red states, which Ohio is now a red state, but in other swing states, Florida's probably the next biggest one to where it comes into that, but it's now more of a red state than it is a swing state. In Ohio, Florida and Ohio are become the same way politically at this point, to where it's just kind of whatever.
And obviously this is a huge attack on LGBTQ youth, but I also think that it's just a huge attack on the community in general. And I think it's important to look at, yes, this is one bill that was signed into law, but it's one bill that's going to be the start of many, especially I think we're naive to think that this is not going to be a domino effect under, the new administration coming in this month. So what do you guys think institutions like Ohio University can do to help, kind of combat the negative effects that these bills are going to have on students, not just trans students, but, all LGBTQIA students at their universities?
I mean, like Lily said earlier, I think it just makes Ohio feel entirely unwelcoming. Then also people just don't get to live their lives in a way that just makes sense.
How do we like make sure that not that they can, because I don't know if we can with these in place, but like how do we make sure that people have a little bit more autonomy to live their life in the wake of, what we're seeing right now?
I don't really know. There was one survey of like the Ohio Religious Scholars did a survey or something a while ago to where it was like 76% of Ohioans are for anti-discrimination laws against LGBTQ people. Like, it's majority of Ohioans personally just don't care. Like, it doesn't have like this effect of like big scary people. It's whatever. It's just living and doing their things the way that they do. Cool, great. But I don't think there's a way we can, as citizens of Ohio, except for just living our lives and just letting people live their own, compared to what the legislature is going to do and what they're just going to decide and what they're going to put forth. And
Lily, what do you think? Do you agree that there's like not really much we can do?
One thing that's been on my mind as the legislature becomes sort of increasingly hostile toward LGBTQ Ohioans is the importance of representation and queer visibility, which is something that's sort of targeted by these bills, but having teachers and educators who are openly queer or openly allies stay in Ohio and continue to set an example and show students that it's possible to live a happy adult life as a queer person, even when, the society can be kind of hostile towards LGBTQ people, I think is really important, but also I can see that becoming increasingly kind of like hard to ask of people to like stay in Ohio and continue to set that example as it becomes less welcoming.
For sure. But I do think enough people are here right now that are either part of that community or very strong allies of that community that would be willing to make students comfortable, whether that's in their classroom, in a student org, and that's at the college level that I was thinking about. But I think it's a whole different beast with like elementary, middle, and high schools, just because so much can be regulated within such a small building, more so than it can, Yeah, we may not be able to regulate the hundreds of bathrooms that are on OU's campus, but in a high school where there's only, 6? Mm-hmm. Yeah, those can be policed. People can stand by those. So I think that we just need to continuously be supporting young trans people that we know personally. Yeah.
I can tell you, as of today, there are 15 states that ban trans people from using bathrooms based on their gender identity, 2 of which go all the way up from government-owned buildings and spaces, including K-12 schools, colleges, and more. Those are Florida and Utah. It also includes Idaho, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, South Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, and North Dakota. Mostly all red states. Iowa's kind of hit or miss right now anyway, and Virginia's kind of the same anyway. Yeah, pretty much all of them are red states collectively. There's the 35 other states that don't have any bathroom bans on any transgender people, or no state ban on transgender people use bathrooms or facilities. Also includes the 5 other territories and DC. So there's that. I don't necessarily know who was first, but I can tell you those are all the ones that do.
I think we should jump back to HB 8 because this legislation is just so... It has been just so interesting to me ever since, Florida kind of came out with its first iteration of it. Because what do you mean opt out of talking about sexuality? Like, this is what I just don't get. I don't remember who it was that I heard talking, but it was somebody on the news. It was somebody in Florida that was talking about this bill being like, we don't need to talk about pronouns or whatever it is. And it's like, what? Okay, then do you not do you not want to be called by like the pronouns you prefer either? Like you just don't want to talk about them at all, right? Or you don't want to talk about sexuality at all. You know, like you physically cannot do that. It is inextricably intertwined with media. It is inextricably intertwined with what we are reading. Like sexuality is like, it's not this big scary thing. It's something that has just like straight up been around for a long time. And so I think like putting this like negative connotation on it and calling like anything that's talking about sexuality, we've got to nix it out. You literally cannot do that. You want me to go to your library and X out every pronoun that's listed in any book? Okay, well now you're not going to be able to read it because it doesn't make any sense. Like,
which has always been a fun argument to see is like, oh, I don't care about pronouns. You said I. I is a pronoun.
I is a pronoun.
I, me, we, you, he, her, they, that. All of it is a pronoun.
Right.
Like, well, all of it is a pronoun.
Right.
All of those are pronouns.
Those
like
are
to
pronouns.
where it's just grammatically how the English language works. It's you can't avoid them. I said you. That's a pronoun. It's just they're collectively entwined throughout our language to where you can't just cut it out because someone might have changed the way that they feel or the way that they identify and want to go by these other ones. Cool, great, but it doesn't affect anyone else in any way, really.
Even just like the vagueness of it too is something to highlight. Like, okay, your kid opts out of sexuality content. Okay, well now we're not going to watch Cinderella meet her prince. Or like, that is like, heterosexual is asexuality, right? Like, I just can't tell if the people that are writing these bills and signing them into law genuinely do not realize the impact that this, like, these vague terms can have on the state, or if that's exactly the game they're playing, or if it is like very intentional that these words are not being defined specifically so that it can be up to the schools or it can be up to whoever it is to define them. But I think it'd be interesting to open up a conversation between us of why, how does the vagueness help the Republican Party? Why not just define it? Why not just say what you're doing? If you're going to be unkind and you are going to attack a community, like, why are you not doing it with your chest? Do you not fully believe in it? Like, these are all questions that go through my head when I'm wondering why they leave things so ambiguous. Lily, I know you had talked about some of that, like the vagueness in some of these terms. So when you were doing your research, what did you find?
Yeah, so the sexuality content phrasing that's in the bill, that was as it's been signed into law, I actually learned was amended back in 2023 from sexual concepts or sexually explicit concepts to sexuality content. So there you see it sort of getting narrowed to like, oh no, we weren't talking about sexually explicit. But when we said sexually explicit, we meant gay people. And then the other term, sort of vague term in there is gender ideology, which, in recent years, there's also been a lot of talk about critical race theory. But the difference I'm noticing here is that, critical race theory is a real academic term, whereas gender ideology is not really a thing that has a clear definition. So you can see how the use of gender ideology is, it's not that it specifically targets anyone, but because it's so vague, it can be targeted at anyone who legislators want it to be targeted at.
Okay, that answers my question about the, like, why be vague then,
Yeah, the way that I take that vagueness is kind of exactly how you explained it to where it is. And kind of what you said earlier, Taylor, where it's up for interpretation based on, like, the school and, like, to where, certain schools, won't really care, whatever, but other ones that do can really push down hard on it, and they have that vague backing that they can focus their entire idea on and say, oh, hey, this is here, I get to do this, and you can't stop me. But it doesn't apply everywhere, all the time, always, so if you keep it vague, then it can apply pretty much anywhere broadly, whenever they feel it could be necessary.
By not applying it to someone specifically, applying it to everyone. I'm curious, do you have examples of how that term, like gender ideology, is specifically like used in the bill?
I believe it says that it's in the part about the students having the or parents having the option to opt their students out of certain lessons, and that it's sexuality content is defined as content involving sexual concepts or gender ideology. So those gender ideology falls under, I guess, the also vague umbrella term of sexuality content. And that's one of those things that parents have the opportunity to opt their students out of.
Thinking about interpretation is a way of like civil disobedience for maybe even Ohio University, but I'm thinking hopefully more like large scale. If these words, can be interpreted to apply to anyone, what if we just like place the reversal card on the table? Do you know what I mean? What if we were like, okay,
I mean, I get what you're saying, but it can't happen.
Why?
Based on our legislature? Like people choosing not to enforce this?
No, I'm saying enforce it, but enforce it like using the vague language. If you're going to be like, okay, we can't talk about sexual concepts and gender ideology. Okay, now your favorite children's books that you want to be read to your kids at school, yeah, we're not going to read them anymore because they talk about gender ideology, or they're talking about a couple getting together, and that's sexuality. So we're done. We're not gonna teach it.
I mean, I can see it, but I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it'll have the effect that we'd want it to have.
Really? Do you think it would just like negatively rewind?
Yeah.
In my brain, it would have to like make it to the courts to do that, but then I'm thinking about the Ohio Supreme Court and how quick they would define those terms for us. Yeah.
This does make me think of a story out of Texas recently about a school district that used that sort of language in a Texas law about sexually explicit materials in schools, and used it to ban the Bible from their school district for sexually explicit content. And that's currently being challenged, I believe. But that's sort of an example of those who oppose this type of legislation using the vagueness to their advantage.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah. You just wonder how it would go over in Ohio. I'm curious how it goes over in Texas. Is it in the courts? Do you know?
Hold on, let me look it up. I think the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments like really soon for it, but I don't know if it's the one I'm thinking of, so let me look that up real quick.
It's just so frustrating to me that the same players over and over and over again keep getting these wins, and it doesn't matter. It feels like it doesn't matter how many times the ACLU goes in there and is like, hey, you are literally violating thousands of people's civil liberties, and it just keeps going. Like, it's hard to keep hope in times where bills like this are getting, passed like nobody's business. But at the same time, I think I find strength in talking to people from the ACLU, reading, what the ACLU is posting and saying about these things, because it's nice to know that there are people out here fighting for it. And even just the three of us sitting in here having conversations like this, hoping that anyone listens to this podcast, hoping that if they do, they continue to talk about it. So I think going back to the, what can we do about it? I think even just it starts at like grassroots levels of us. We don't stop talking about it. That's what we can do about it. Making sure people are aware of what's happening, because I guarantee most people on this campus, and honestly most people in Ohio, have no idea that this bill got passed.
So the one other bill that got, pretty much introduced in 2023, so not last year, the year before, December 13th of 2023, the Ohio Legislature passed the amended version of House Bill 68, which pretty much banned critical access to healthcare for trans and gender nonconforming youth. In addition to restricting medical care, House Bill 68 was combined with a different bill to also ban trans girls and women from playing in sports in both K through 12 grades and at universities. Then on December 29th of 23, Governor DeWine vetoed it, and then it went back to the House, and on January 10th and 24th of 2024, both the House and Senate passed that and became law again. But then the ACLU filed a lawsuit in January 29th. It went up all the way to the appellate court, and as of September 11th of 2024, their legal team was presented oral arguments in front of 3 judges for an hour. But then, from what I can still tell, they are waiting for a decision from the appellate court following their oral argument, which was supposed to come out in weeks, but I don't see anything anywhere as of right now, and that could just be my poor research abilities, but I just can't find it. So that's the only other one that I know of that's been pretty big.
Yeah, that's a really big one. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet.
Because the biggest issue with it the first time around, or the biggest thing that they pushed that through first, was just because of the gender affirming care.
Yeah, I was also thinking it's interesting to see a lot of sort of bold new education-related bills coming out of states at a time where the Supreme Court has a conservative supermajority, and also when, in the case of Ohio, we just elected a 6-1 conservative majority in the Ohio Supreme Court. So it'll be interesting to see, even in the case of laws that have very similar laws that have been struck down in the past, if legislators who sort of have the intention of seeing what the new court will think of it, and if they're willing to reconsider, just to see how that turns out.
Yeah, absolutely. The court is super important to take into consideration here. Things that would have been shot down immediately by previous courts could, get through by a landslide here. And the legislatures know that.
It's, the language of House Bill 8 leaves it to, for the most part, leaves it to school boards to make policies in accordance with this bill. So that kind of leaves wiggle room for school districts to either try to find loopholes in the way this is written, or to really enforce it against LGBTQ students to its full potential. So for one, that social worker whose testimony I mentioned earlier points out that it's arguably in violation of Title IX because it creates a hostile environment for LGBTQ students. It also creates a conflict for social workers who operate under the social work code of ethics and are not supposed to break confidentiality. And it'll be interesting to see what school districts who don't wish to implement these policies can really do about it.
Yeah. I agree. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds in real time.
Yeah, because if it all comes down to school board, 99% of them are pretty much community members anyway. Generally 100% of them should be, but, you get the occasional whatever. And I think basing that by community standard, sometimes good, sometimes bad. We'll see what happens, I guess, but it all comes down to how this goes into effect and what people decide to do. So
I wanted to talk about how HB8 would actually look in the schools. So it's legislation that requires these schools to notify parents if the child identifies as LGBTQ. How the question then is, in what capacity are they finding out? And I'm thinking about students, young students specifically, that are going to teachers that they trust or guidance counselors that they trust and talking to them about their gender, their sexuality, or their gender identification, because likely they may not be able to go home and tell anybody about this. They don't have a parent that's going to be accepting of even being open to even having a conversation about it. So, they're going into these schools thinking that they have a safe space, and then it's being turned on them. This safe space just turns to exploiting them, because as soon as that conversation's over, now that teacher has to make a phone call home. And then when that student gets home, walks in the door, you don't know what's going to happen. So we're saying that, this is for the kids. This is for the protection of the kids. If you wanted to protect the kids, you would give them a safe space to talk about how they're feeling and to work through how they're feeling. Not tattling on their parents about them, because you don't know if they're going home to a space where that conversation is even going to be entertained. In fact, I would venture to say that most of the time they're going home to a space where that conversation is being shut down immediately, and they may be punished for bringing it up in the first place. And that's what's so heartbreaking to me about this bill, is that I just wish LGBTQ young people specifically felt like they could live and exist in this world and in their schools and talk to people that they trust. And it's also, on the flip side of that, putting teachers or just any staff members of schools in incredibly awkward positions, because what if they do want to be an ally? What if they are an ally? Well, now they're putting their job on the line by keeping their mouth shut, and that's scary as well. So this just genuinely feels like a lose-lose for the staff. It feels like a lose for the students. And the only people this feels like a win for are the people sitting in the Ohio State House that identify as Republican.
Well, thank you, Lily, for being here and joining us and bringing everything you brought to the conversation and letting us know more than we knew before. And we can't wait to see your article come out. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Athens Happens. If you're interested in joining the New Political, come see us in the Radio Television Communications Building on Sundays from 7 to 8 p.m. We actually are having our interest meeting in just 2 days, this Sunday from 7 to 8. So please go there if you're interested in writing, if you're interested in recording, anything New Political wise. Please just stop in to see if it's your vibe. Also, make sure to check out thenewpolitical.com for more podcast episodes and other content. Thank you, and until next time.